Hello, everybody. Apologies for the time we're coming on. These were due to the challenges of the internet and everything else as I post on my page. Okay. Right. Welcome to another episode on the challenges and triumph of online teaching during the pandemic at the Female Educator Roundtable with your host, Debby Enoe, Teacher Success Coach, and another of my educator who is going to introduce herself. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming on board.
Thank you so much. So my name is Shamika Jones, and I'm here in the States, the United States, Chicago, Illinois specifically. And I've been teaching for 10 years for a Chicago public school system and in the area of special education. We call them diverse learners or the diverse learner department here in Chicago, primarily in science. That's been my background, and that's also what my degrees are in the sciences. And so I've typically just only taught in the inner city schools. So that's been in secondary education as well. So that's kind of been my scope and experience. I only had a year and a half in elementary school. So I prefer high school.
Why? Thank you for the introduction. Why do you prefer high school?
I think developmentally, I relate and connect with the 14 to 19-year-olds a little bit more than the younger ones. And I also have the temperament to to handle the the older students. I thought my experience with elementary kids, it was just, I just was not accustomed to that developmental age. And it was a lot of a mental shift for me and a professional shift that I hadn't had experience with. So I prefer the bigger babies.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from because I taught the primary for a while as well, and I think, yeah, oh my, there's no way I could go back on that.
Okay.
As you say, for me, the mindset, I'll
Yeah.
have to have a mindset shift in order to teach that age group. Because once you leave that age group, it's really challenging to go back down and remember that you need boxes of tissue all the time because the nose are always running and stuff like that. So I can't remember that.
Exactly.
Thank you for coming on board. As I said, what I want you to share with us is you say you teach special education
Yeah.
students. And I also have background in special education, but I'm not too sure in terms of the online platform, how I would actually be able to teach them to also understand whether or not they're connecting with what I'm saying and how am I able to assess them. So I would find it really challenging because I haven't taught them for a while.
Mhm.
So for me actually teaching them now, it's going to be a real challenge, much less, the online platform. So share with us how you're actually negotiating that with this kind of student. And what's the level of special education needs? What's the level? Moderate, mix? What is it?
Yeah, so I would say anywhere from um, low, ranging from high, low, I would say, to high in terms of
Oh.
cognitive ability. Yeah. So it's a pretty wide range across the board, which makes it even the more difficult, right?
Mhm.
What I found is I kind of found like, man, I felt like a fish out of water. I'm like, how do I do this? How do I implement accommodations in a virtual learning platform that we're using? I asked a lot of questions from our case manager who did, professional development to use other tools, but there were really certain things like outside of them actually submitting work, that was the only way that I was able to do a check-in, right? Because usually you're doing that in real time in the classroom to check for accuracy. And also, there was really no behaviorally, you really don't even know what behaviors are exhibited besides what you see or how they're performing in the remote learning atmosphere. So it was a huge challenge for me to just know what to do and how to manage that, and just I had no idea, how to do that. I'm like, how do I do this? Um, Even with testing and accommodations, you can't pull a student out to a separate location. I can't even create a separate virtual room because that just I just didn't know how that would really work, in that space. And there was so many modifications from the general ed teacher, in making, trying to accommodate the entire class. And so we kind of needed everyone to file in line so that, we were giving everybody the same access to the learning. And I wanted to clarify just my role. I was, I'm a 100% this year, this past school year was 100% collaborative team teaching. So
Okay.
I was always in a learning environment virtually with another gen ed teacher. So I would add feedback or support or more explanation if that was needed during that time. But a lot of it was student directed, and because that's the only thing that we could really think of being more effective for every student, which allowed me, even on the Google Classroom is the platform that we used, I could send out special messages to the kids if they needed any additional help, that they could always reach out to me on a one-on-one basis, and then vice versa. So those are kind of some of the challenges and how I, negotiated that to create solutions around it.
Thank you. Another thing is, how many students did you have?
Oh boy. Across all classes, I didn't have any more than 15 or 20. 15 or
Okay.
Yeah, across all my classes. I have five CTT classes or collaborative team classes, and four different teachers that I was collaborating with. So even in the live classroom, that was even, that sometimes that's a challenge when you have, several teachers that you have to meet with to discuss different students. Um, and then now you're remote learning and you still have to kind of keep up with each teacher. And the way that we structured it at our particular school, there were it was kind of like a block scheduling, almost similar to a collegiate level schedule, where they would have two of their content area classes on Monday and Wednesday, and then on Tuesday and Thursday they'd have the other two, and they were only on remote learning for 2 hours a day, and that was it for their classes. And because I had um, math, and I had three different math teachers within that 1 hour, I would only be able to do 20 minutes each with each one of them. So I had to rotate between different virtual learning spaces on Mondays and Wednesdays. So it's like, man, in one class, I'm missing 40 minutes. In another class, I'm missing 40 minutes. In another class, I'm missing 40 minutes, and I pop in and out, and hopefully I catch, the lesson to be able to, I don't know, help add, additional explanation. But there was very little of that. So I really felt like a fish out of water when it came to that. And I think just reflecting, this summer about, well, how will we do that this year if I'm being shared between two or three different teachers in the same content area, how can I be as effective if I have to split my time within one single hour among all of those classes? That just felt um, like just kind of made me feel out of sorts. Yeah.
Mm, mm. Thank you. How did you maintain the online community classroom? How do you maintain a community online, especially with students who've got learning disability? How have you done that?
So for me, it was a lot of um, one-on-one, just reaching out because I always and I've all just always been my practice to preserve the psyche and the social emotional learning piece. I never wanted anyone or any of my diverse learner students to feel stigmatized or felt like they were isolated or singled out. So for me, it was a lot of one-on-one conversations that I would have with them by directly contacting them and their parent, and they would all, and of course, I would use the virtual platform to communicate with them if I did that individually, or just a one on one direct call to follow up with them and check on them to see if everything was okay with the classes or what challenges they were having. So that was my form of communication with them. It was kind of outside of the virtual learning space so that I could have a direct conversation with them so they understood what my role was, even just popping into the virtual learning, and they not necessarily hearing my voice, but hearing more of the general ed teacher's voice during the session, that Miss Jones is still present. And you always know if you have a question that you can always ask that question. And if you would get feedback from me. If you wanted to have a conversation privately, just reserve your question for that. And then I would definitely help you on a separate platform without anyone else knowing about that. And I was always very sensitive to preserving, the social emotional piece for our kids because, teaching in the inner city, social emotional learning is a huge piece. And it's not just for inner city kids, but for all children. But because we have, kids who may be homeless, unstable home lives, a little food insecurity. We don't know what the situation may be. Um, it was always my forethought to consider those things and to preserve, my students to make them feel like they could be successful, that everything was going to be okay, that Miss Jones was going to be advocating for you as long as you do X, Y, Z. And sometimes that reinforcement really helped to push them along, right? So that's what I would say about that.
Thank you. How do you think some of the students felt in relationship to they've got special education need and they now have to try to, maneuver their way through this new platform?
Mhm.
What was some of the things that was coming up for them?
Yeah, that was a lot. A lot of them felt discouraged. Some of my students would say, and I'm talking about all students, very distracted. Um, and a lot of them kind of felt um, like it was overwhelming. That was another word that a lot of them used, was overwhelming. They felt that they were getting a lot of work from their teachers, and that was putting a lot of task on them. And I think part of that, just to shed some light, sometimes when you don't have someone facilitating your learning process right there in the physical, because our students have not, some have not developed time management skills to where they can actually do things independently and manage all of that themselves. A lot of things would just kind of pile up. A lot of them didn't take it seriously. A lot of us thought we were probably going to go back, especially at the end of March. We thought, oh, we'd be back maybe mid-April, or fourth quarter. We thought that, but that didn't turn out to be the case. And so once you had this continued pile up of work. Now it feels overwhelming to them. Nonetheless, what we had to do was be responsive to that. But those, I would just say, overwhelming, disappointed, discouraged. Some of them just kind of felt like, oh, this is just, there's no hope, I'm going to fail. Once they knew that they were really actually going to be getting graded, when we created our policies for the end of the year, um, that kind of discouraged a lot of the kids. So those are kind of some of the conversations and things that were coming up for them.
Thank you. So how did you, in terms of those that were feeling overwhelmed, those that were feeling that, this is not, they're going to fail, etc., how did you empower them? What did you do?
Sure. Yeah. So for me, I always go to the gen ed teacher to have a conversation about what I'm hearing and then their perspective, because I always like to have like a I do like collaboration, right? So I support that, and I wanted to be an active participant in that as much as I possibly could. So having a conversation with a gen ed teacher in terms of what I was hearing and feeling from them, I just wanted to know what their take was on their perspective. So I think we were all just kind of really responsive to that. So there was pre-recorded lessons that allows our students to do things at their own pace, which was really good. And then what we did in the virtual learning space was just be available, right? Just be available if they needed to check in, right? And then they get attendance credit and all of that. But that's kind of how we were responsive. Another strategy was to because we were only doing one assignment that was due per week for all of their classes. So that really minimized the task and that overwhelm that they were experiencing. And that was our response to that. Just one assignment per week. And so what we did was in another class, a math class, the math teacher that I was collaborating with, we discussed putting all the work that was that they needed to do in one post so that they could access all those pieces in that one post instead of having separate, seemingly separate assignments. That's what it might have looked like, that overwhelmed their minds. We just did one single post and they can just go to those links to complete the assignments, because a lot of it was like online learning platforms, Khan Academy and things like that. So, and they would only have to submit um, one assignment for that particular week. That seemed to work a lot better. And that was like maybe the last month of class for that particular class. So those are some of the things that we do. And then also what really turned things up is being responsive to the season that we were in to make the learning relevant. So I was also a co-teacher for an English class, and I thought that she made great connections with what was going on with the George Floyd situation, having the student create a project around that, what they were seeing in their community, which a lot of the students responded well to it. I just, me and the teacher, we were my co-teacher, we had conversations about how they responded really well to that. So those are some of the things that we did in response to just this change of environment.
Thank you. How was the parents? How involved? Because I remember you and I were talking in terms of that sometimes parents would like to get involved but they can't, etc. How do you feel that the parents were in relationship to the online platform, to the physical classroom?
I almost want to say my perspective is a little limited to just my students in particular, but I know that parents were very frustrated. Some of the parents have been affected themselves because they couldn't go to work during the time. And I think they just rely very heavily on the teachers, the teaching staff, and the administrative staff to help communicate. But the beauty about our school environment and our principal was that he was so connected to the parents prior to this. He has very healthy relationships with the parents because we have what's called a parent university, which allows all the parents to kind of connect at our school. So I think that because that relationship was grounded and established prior to COVID happening, the parents almost felt like they had an abundance of support. Teachers were calling home to check on students. And this is the thing, students who normally probably wouldn't hear from certain teachers. We would communicate in our teacher meetings. They would say, wow, the students were really glad to hear because they felt like we cared. And I think the parent side of things, they appreciated that as well, which kind of alleviated some stressors that they were experiencing, having going through this same thing as we all were, you know, because it's like we're all experiencing this at the same time. Nobody has experienced this before. So we're all trying to figure it out at the same time. But I think the general climate was just all around support. Yeah.
Thank you. So, in terms of discipline and engagement, how did, although yes, I hear the parents were actively involved, but in terms of support, etc., how did you connect with the discipline and the engagement? Because in my head, I'm looking at students with learning challenges in terms of mild to severe. So how,
Yeah.
what was the behavior like on the platform? Because bearing in mind, it's a new thing, they have a lot of anxiety, they're feeling overwhelmed. What was the whole thing like?
Yeah, they this is something that I was saying. I almost jokingly say, well, what discipline issues do we have now? you know, um, kind of jokingly, but I would say that I, I, if we were in the classroom, the students who weren't going to come to class weren't going to come to virtual learning. And the students who were going to come to class were going to show up on virtual learning. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was pleasantly surprised to see as many students through this virtual learning space, and even students who, toward the end of the year, would show up that normally would not have. Here's the thing also, we had students who worked, and while they were at work, were also in the virtual learning space with us at simultaneously. So when I say in terms of behavior management, I think there was pretty much little to none in terms of disruption. In terms of attendance, of course, that was a huge issue because you can't physically influence, someone. You're not seeing them on a daily basis. So it's so easy to hide, right? So easy to run away, even if you're calling and trying to get in touch with them. It's easy to do that. So that was the difficult part around this. In terms of engagement, that was the piece that, really got me because I'm like, who is really engaged? But in response to that, there was so many different some tools that were used in order to engage the students before the lesson online that was interactive that we would all do, especially with math. And I thought that that was so awesome because some things I learned so much. I was like, I didn't even know that tool existed to get them to really engage in the class. And when I was telling you that project that the English teacher and myself were facilitating around the whole social climate that erupted or kind of shifted after the George Floyd incident occurred, that really engaged them because it was relevant. They were experiencing it in real life. So when I say that, that kind of turned the needle up a little bit in terms of engagement toward the end of the year because at, in kind of the middle of this thing, I did not know whether or not, you know, kids were going to fall off or stick with us or take it seriously and really believe that it was a serious thing, that you're really being graded and assessed. And I was pleasantly surprised and also just grateful to have a staff of people who were willing to work together to just figure this thing out, you know.
Thank you. It's it's so interesting though, because one of the things I'm just thinking in terms of, the students, in terms of their focusing, in terms of their engagement. Another thing is, how were they in terms of, because you have the teenagers, and as we know, they could be very challenging, in the physical classroom. Could you imagine on the online platform when they're free to do whatever they want to do?
Yeah.
So, what was it like in terms of getting them to turn on the camera, getting them to do the work you said? What was it like? Because bearing in mind, these students also have outside challenges because they have learning challenges.
Yeah. So here's the thing. It wasn't, I would say, just in terms of the cameras being on, that really wasn't a huge,
Okay.
it really wasn't a huge push for in our virtual learning spaces. It wasn't really a request for the virtual learning spaces. I do know some kids were even vocal in saying, I'm still in the bed. I'm listening, but I'm still in the bed. And I'm like, you know what? I don't think I've seen this kid that often. And I'm glad they even tuned in. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think for our community and our school environment and our student demographic, that really wasn't a push so much as it was to just motivate them to come, because there was some students who just, whether you're in person or on virtual learning, they didn't want to come at all. I mean, some kids, they come to school and half be there mentally. And then on virtual learning, I have to pull teeth to get you to understand that this is going to affect your GPA, and then having to, here's the connectedness in this whole thing, knowing students who know other students who can actually influence them to come. That's the beauty in it, because and the relationships kind of speaks to the relationship that the teachers have with the students. So now you have, teacher who has a relationship with student A has a relationship with, has a friendship with student B, and they talk all the time, and they're the ones who are able to get the student to come to the virtual learning space. Here's the thing, we didn't care how that happened. We were just glad that there was a connectedness in our community where that would actually result in people or our students coming to the virtual learning space. So I'm gonna say right now, I don't really feel like it was a whole bunch of sweating the small stuff, as as it might have been in other school communities or whatever the case, or with the smaller kids, because I can understand that, especially when it comes to turning on cameras. We wanted you to show up. We wanted you to show up because we knew that if you showed up, then you were going to get something and you were actually going to be connected. Unfortunately, you know, maybe we should have been a little bit more strict on being explicit about, turning on those cameras. And, there's sometimes I showed up and I didn't turn on my camera, you know.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I my hair wasn't looking right, so I don't want you to see Miss Jones looking crazy. You know, keeping it real, right? And so, especially if the gen ed teacher's voice was on or whatever, I would just kind of, take the background a little bit when that was the case. So, and sometimes there was like, it was just really creative how the gen ed teachers would, log in two different places and have their camera, as like a form of an Elmo, casting the image while they're still able to talk. So
Okay.
I was learning a lot myself and just kind of taking notes. And I'm like, okay, this is very innovative. So let me take notes on this to see how we can approach this, because I don't really think that we would be prepared to come back in the fall, but we're working on a plan for that now.
Thank you. Do you feel that for special education students, do you feel that they've actually gained anything from the online platform in terms of how they negotiate the online platform? Do you think that in terms of when you look at online platform with special education students, how what have they taken in? It's just kind of a because I'm just looking at my experience of teaching special education students, and for me, A, I would find it very challenging. B, I wouldn't know what to do. C, I would also be thinking, okay, how much of that are they taking in? Is it enough for me to say, yes, well, they've actually learned this,
Yeah.
so I'm able to move on?
Mhm. I would say it's a wide range because
Mm,
some of my diverse learner students, oh my God, they would just be so plugged in with the engagement tools that we would use and things of that nature. And I'm like, man, good. Then others, I may not even see them, right? Because they may not attend. And then as I'm watching how they're scoring on the problem sets that we have in the beginning of the class, um, I'm like, oh, okay, they're not getting it. Okay, now what can I do to help them? So it was a wide
mm,
range
mm,
of that going on. And I'm gonna tell you, to be honest, I felt really helpless. It just wasn't a good feeling as a teacher. I was like, oh my God, I want to do more, but how do I do more? Because
mm,
I thought those who showed up, you really want to give them an opportunity to succeed. And then when you hear them saying, I don't get it, like when I call home, I don't get what's going on, Miss Jones, and I need help. I'm like, no problem. Let's do a one-on-one. We can do a one-on-one Google chat, and I can pull up a whiteboard and we can just start doing problems together. No problem. So I just felt so helpless. Like it doesn't really work well, or it didn't work well in my experience for a lot of my diverse learners, especially the low highs and
mm,
moderates. But the highs, they would, when math was really their content and their subject that they felt confident about,
mm,
really able to see how much they were able to do independently, which was very good because in person, they would have that learned helplessness or shut down behavior going on
mm,
because they use the IEP as a crutch, as a I can't do
mm,
because I have it. No, you can do. You just learn differently, right?
mm, mm,
In such a way where you access the information this way, right? Or you favor or have an affinity for a different learning
mm,
modality than someone else, but you can learn it. So this was also a very good thing because for certain students who didn't want to perform or were distracted by other behaviors in the classroom, which now that stimuli was removed,
mm,
right? Now I got you by yourself and you're independently learning, so to speak.
mm,
Now I can see what you can really do, which was very refreshing to see. Very refreshing to see. So it was a
mm,
range.
mm,
Hmm.
mm. Thank you. Do you feel that parents ought to be actively involved in a student's learning, or at what age you think parents should be actively involved, especially students with learning disability or diverse learning needs?
Well, I think we would all want teachers, or excuse me, parents to be involved at from the beginning,
Mm, mm,
because what a wonderful experience it is to watch your child develop and learn.
mm,
And sometimes, and I'll speak to this, because there may be parents who themselves have not received the or experienced the parenting skills that they needed,
mm,
you know, they may not have thought that or think that their role is as important as it is because that's what they experience. And so now we have a position to play as educators, as teachers, to almost be a liaison for them as well, to say, hey, you're an important piece to this. You don't have to know a single thing about the content area, but to support your child's development, their social and emotional state, right? Their well being, just being there and present means all the difference in terms of that child knowing one that the parent um, feels like the education is important. And so when the parent, you know, feels like the education is important, then so will the child. So you have that parent who is at every event at school that we have, every parent teacher conference, and talking to the teachers. And the child sees that year after year after year. That becomes the standard. The child knows, oh, my mom is always coming to, or my dad is always coming to report card pickup day, right? Always, because they've done that since pre-K to senior year, right? that that level of support is sometimes that's all that can be given from certain parents. Certain parents can do more, but there are other parents who can lead you that, and to have that in place, oh my god, it would make a greater difference for that child as well as the teacher, knowing that they have parental support and has that line of communication. That's one thing that I have valued in my professional career as a teacher. I would always reach out to my parents, and whatever challenges or struggles they were having, I would fill the gap for them. But knowing that on the other end, when the child leaves these four walls of this school building, knowing that I have your support, that you have a voice to support what I'm trying to do when they come back here, it means the world of difference. So to have that means everything. I really can't even put it into words. And when I've experienced parents who have consistently been active in a child's life, in a student's life, you can tell the difference in the performance.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
definitely tell the difference because they know that this is serious. This is not a game. My mom or my dad are going to have something to say if I disrespect my teacher, if I don't perform, if I don't do the task that's being asked. They know that's going to be a consequence behind that. Those who's kind of been left to raise themselves, it's a different story and it looks a lot different in the classroom, which makes it more often than not more difficult for the teacher.
It is so very true. Thanks for that. It is so very true that, it doesn't matter whether or not you are teaching special ed students or you're teaching students in main grade education. When the parent is very active in that child's life, it makes such a difference for the outcome of the results of that student. It makes such a difference. And as you say, the child actually value the whole thing because the child know that any slip up, you'll be getting to the parents.
Yes.
Because I've had situations where students are saying to me, Miss, you don't have to phone my parents because it's okay. No, I'm going to phone your parents because you mess up. But you see, because they know that you have this connection with the parents, they're very aware of how they behave in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
And Deb,
it really does make a difference.
it does. And let me just also add this as well. And I know that historically, students who haven't had the most parental support, those students typically get calls home for negative behaviors that they're demonstrating in the class. What I decided to do,
Yeah.
because I've come up in an era of transformational teaching and leadership, it was always encouraged that you call a parent and just tell them what they did what their child did that was positive. And so it really disarms the parent as well as the child, because typically by the time a student gets to high school, um, their personality has been established, right? For a while now. Their patterns have been established, their reputation has been created, and that follows them. And sometimes we get that story. I know a lot of times because as a special education teacher, I have the honor of reading through an individualized education plan. So I know what their story is or what the written story is. So I always make it a point at the beginning of every year to call the parents just to introduce myself and let them know that I'm here to support you and your child. Before I even meet the child, before I even read the IEP, I'm calling home to introduce myself to that parent so they know that I'm the one that's going to be working alongside your child, right? And that I am here to work with you. So it empowers them, even though I don't know too much about the parent, it empowers them to say, you're working with me. Because a lot of parents by that time, if they've had quote unquote issues or problems with their child in school, they're kind of hands off at this point. Like, I already know I'm going to expect to get a call about you, about some teacher or some student that you know got into it with. But when you do that, it truly disarms them, and you can create and establish a really positive foundation with that parent, and the scope of the year can look completely different. I don't count it a coincidence that one teacher will contact a student and most of the contacts have been negative reports. Whereas now I'm going to call and I get through, I get a working number, I get through to the parent and can have an effective conversation with them. And it's because I set the stage from the beginning of the year. And so that's what I think is important. I've practiced that since I started teaching. So, that's just how I learned. That's what I would want a teacher to do if I had a child sitting in their school, in their classroom, in that desk. I would want a teacher to call me and let me know that they're on my side. They're here to support me. I know I got a kid that can flip over a desk, all of them really, but I want to know that you're here to support me.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm challenged with is that, teachers, you have nothing positive to say about a student that you deem to be a problem. I, you know, in my eye, I've been called some of the worst things by children that you couldn't even imagine, right? Or maybe you can because we're teachers.
Exactly.
We've been called some things.
Yeah, exactly.
But I always tell my students, whether you want to curse me out today or you want to curse me out tomorrow, you can't do anything too wrong or bad that would make me change how I see you. And when you tell a student that, who has historically been kicked out of school, probably expelled from a school, and it was able to come back for whatever reason, right? Has had truancy issues. Guess what? You get a different kind of kid that shows up in that classroom, and guess what? You probably get them to do just about anything you ask them to do. Now that I do know to be the case.
It's interesting, thank you, because it means that child begin to feel valued.
Absolutely.
And once a child starts to feel value, the child would move mountain for you because they're on this mission to please you because you are valuing them and see their words.
Yeah.
And it is so very important. It is also very important, especially much more teaching special educational students, because too often once one teacher will have an issue with that child, and the
Mhm.
teacher then brings it through the staff room for every other teacher. And if you're a teacher that are not fully aware or check for yourself, you would take that on as the package of that child, rather than you trying to see for yourself. Something I've always said, that that student may not work in your lesson, that student may not engage with you as well as that student engaging with me. So we need to look at that student as an individual with every teacher he goes or she goes to. And that
Yeah,
is so important,
it is.
because, or else it becomes, in my experience, the self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that was, that's some of the issue. I think in terms of educators, we need to be really mindful what we are told about a child, and as to how we negotiate and how we use that information we have, because it could become a label and that child is going to wear that label.
Absolutely.
And I feel that as educators, we need to remember how powerful we are, especially when we are dealing with students with special education needs, especially so, because we not too sure the baggages that come in with, where the baggages stem from. It could be from childhood, which then demonstrates itself in the teenage years.
Mhm.
And, you know, we have to be so careful, because children wear the labels for whatever reasons they want to wear the label. Because it would be, sometimes they wear the labels because it gives them the attention they need. Although it might be negative attention, but they're still getting the attention. And that's something educators, I personally feel educators need to be, a lot of educators or some educators need to be educated in that area. Because even now, even the same time of COVID, the week, I am still talking to educators in relationship, letting students wear the labels, because we need to be mindful, because it is quite easy for them to wear this label and continue to wear the label, because that label gives them credibility, whether or not it's positive or negative.
That's so
You're
true.
frozen.
Am I frozen?
Yeah. Yeah, you're okay now. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something I feel that we need to be really mindful, and I do not feel educators are mindful enough.
Mm.
And I also feel that's an area that needs professional development, in terms of the words that are used, the words that educators still use when they're connecting with the student, not being mindful enough about the power of the words and the sentences they use.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely agree. Because in this era of education that we're in, and I will almost want to say that I'm a baby in the game. 10 years is kind of a baby in the game. They still call me a baby, even though I'm considered I don't know, a master teacher, I guess 10 years. Um,
Exactly.
we're in this era of um, cultural responsiveness or culturally responsive teaching. And I think that we've put our foot in the water and moving in the right direction in terms of raising our consciousness about it. I don't think it's evenly executed across the board because see, we come with our own biases, you know.
Mm,
We all
mm,
come with our own biases. But I know I've been in private conversations with teachers and I just cringe at the the conversation that's had about our students,
mhm,
and students that look like me
mm,
in
mm,
particular, right? Black
mm,
and brown students,
mm,
because I've always taught in school communities where the students were black and brown.
mm,
And it enlightens me, for one, to know that, oh, there's still a need for us to learn how to be culturally responsive
mm,
to our students. right? And not blame them for being
Mhm.
born into a system, right? That they don't know anything outside of it, right?
Mhm.
It's not their fault that they come with these set of nuances or idiosyncrasies, okay? And so for us as teachers to know that, that's why I say this is a difficult profession and it's not for the faint of heart. It's not just to have a summer off or a vacation off and you think that it's all tulips and roses. It's not, because the reality is on any break that we have, we still working.
Mhm.
'Cause we got to get ready for when we come off break.
Mhm.
And so now I'm getting emails about meetings that we need
Mhm.
to have. So yeah, you get a little bit of space and time, but you're always on. You're always on. Everything is a lesson. You're extracting things from your life. You're extracting things from your content material to try to make this thing culturally sound for an individual who didn't ask to be born into this system, right? Or born the way that they were, or have learned the things that they have learned, right? We have to be able to almost identify on an individual level with every student. And I know that sometimes as a special education teacher, we've kind of gotten the short end of the stick. A lot of people think that our role is easier, but it's not. We probably do about 2 to 3, sometimes 4 jobs, because that's just what the job requires. You understand what I'm saying? And I say, well, let's not focus on that. Let's just focus on doing the work. Let's not focus on our role per se. Let's focus on making this culturally sound for them to make this experience relevant. That was the biggest learning that I have had in these 10 years because I didn't grow up in education the way this generation is growing up in education. I value school because my parents, they were teachers. They're 2 retired teachers, right? I knew that education was important. I wasn't going to do anything different or opposite that. Um, I was going to go to school. I was going to listen to my teachers. I was going to do everything that they told me to do. But this is different.
Mhm.
And we have to be responsive to that, not blame them,
Mhm.
not blame them because it's not their fault.
Mhm.
We're the people who have to stand in position to be an example and
Mhm.
show them that this thing is important. And the way
Mhm.
we do that makes all the difference in terms of their
Mhm.
success.
Mhm.
That's my takeaway. That's my whole takeaway with this experience. That is the piece. That is making this relevant for.
Mhm. Yep, I totally agree with you there for that. Because in terms of when we're teaching, we need to make sure that the students are able to connect, and they will only connect if it is relevant to their life and their
Yeah.
experiences. If it's not, as I said a few days ago, they just zone out because they're saying that you are not speaking to them and you're not speaking the language. So that's why teaching can be very challenging because you are constantly asking yourself, am I connecting with my students? And how am I connecting with my student? Have they zoned out or are they still with me? And the only way they're going to be with you, you need to be connecting with them on their language, on their experiences, and on their, where they're coming from. That's why I said to educators a few days ago, I was saying that when we're actually teaching our students, we need to be mindful of we actually sitting in their chairs.
Mhm. Yep.
Because we need to say, okay, if I was a student listening to me, would I be engaged or would I be falling asleep? And when you actually do that, you will always engage your student because you are reflecting while you're teaching them and saying, okay, am I connecting with them? educators that just go into the classroom, they talk and have the students zone out. They're doing whatever they want to do. And the educator is not even aware of they've lost the students.
Yeah.
It's interesting because in the last few sessions, I'm having more and more educators are saying that
Yeah.
education is not for the faint-hearted.
It is not. It is not. It's not at all. It's, let me tell you this. I, like you, and we were speaking, becoming a teacher was not, this is my second career. So I was in healthcare prior to that. I worked as a registered dietitian in a long-term care facility, and I also had some experience in other areas of dietetics as well. And in 2007, I lost that job. 2008, that's when the economy went down, and it was like everything was a hiring freeze. So my dad said, I was living at home at the time. He said, "You want to stay here, you don't have to work." So he said, "Go up there to the local school district and start substitute teaching." Anyway, the rest is history. I ran from education because I saw my parents come home every day. They were tired. They were talking to me like I was the kids. And listen, I'm not one of your kids, frustration, stress, up all night. I can't even count how many times I saw my mom stay up to like 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning and then get us all up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, how do you do this? I don't get it. Like, why do you want to do this? My dad came home, went into his room, closed the door until it was time to eat dinner. We would eat dinner at 6 o'clock clockwork and sit at the table. We were that family. He wouldn't come out until then because he just needed to decompress. I'm saying to myself, like, is this something you enjoy? I didn't see the prettiness or the satisfaction behind the role of a teacher. I'm like, why do you keep going to this place every day? So I was like, I'm never going to do that. Never, ever going to do that. Okay. But of course, teaching was kind of like in me because everything was a lesson in my house because my parents were teachers. So it was kind of bred in me anyway. So it came quite natural even before I went back to school. And I'm like, am I really doing this? Am I really about to do this? Let me tell you what I realized, what kept them going back. It was relationship. There's nothing like having a relationship with a kid that creates such an impact in their life. And because my parents had taught 30 years, they're now 20 years into teaching and they're seeing their former students. And for my mom, it was really eye-opening because she taught elementary school. So now these kids are 20 and 30 years old saying, "Miss Jones." And I'm like, who is that? They were like, "Oh, she taught me in 3rd grade." How amazing that was. And to be able to, as her daughter, and as my father's daughter, hear those conversations when their students would see them in the grocery store or in the street somewhere. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. And maybe they didn't know that the reward will be so great at that particular time in their career. But I get why you kept going back, because that you making a difference in someone else's life and they remember that is huge. So I said, you know what? I get it. And I like the process. I like the art of teaching. I actually love that. I love the art of teaching. It's a science, but I love the art of it because I'm a creative as well. And I love that. I love that piece to it. It gets difficult when you have to execute, and sometimes we develop an ego behind our craft. This lesson is going to be the bomb. That's what we tell ourselves until it's bomb.
Exactly.
Right? And then we're like, what the heck? What just happened? But here's the thing. As a teacher, we always have to be flexible. Nothing is ever going to go as we have planned, but it's always good to have a plan so you don't get derailed. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I got about education, and I appreciated all the years that they had put into it. And I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do this. You know, I'm gonna do this now. So it's been a rocky road for me, but when a kid tells me that you inspire me,
Mm-hmm.
there are no words to describe how that feels,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have kids who are hungry, who are homeless,
Mm-hmm.
who are raising themselves and their brothers and sisters because their parent or their mother or father have to work as well or are not there to support them. That makes all the difference. And so I'm sticking around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna tell you right now, that's the one thing that's keeping me sticking around. It's for them. For no
Mm-hmm.
other reason, I promise. No other reason but that. So
Mm-hmm. Yep. I share that. I share it. I share it.
yeah.
Because, like you, I didn't set out to be a teacher because in my family, my mother was a teacher, my whole family, aunt, uncle, they're all teacher. And I swear I wasn't going to be a teacher. I wasn't going to be a doctor, a teacher, or a nurse.
Yep.
Right. That
Nope.
was not my forte. As I always say to people, I had negative, career officer who was negative, tried to move me away from what I thought I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I wanted to do. Teaching chose me, and I must say, it's a good choosing. We have a good relationship.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because more and more educators, when they come onto the platform, something they say, teaching is not for the people who are not really ready to dedicate, and for the faint-hearted. It's not, because we are always thinking in terms of how could I improve the students' learning. And
Yeah.
it's an ongoing thing because, as you say, even though you have the holiday, you're not on holiday because your mind is thinking, okay, the last semester, the student, it was a struggle for them to get what I was teaching them. So I think I better change this around. And you are walking the street and you're thinking of how you're changing your lesson.
Yeah,
So your mind you never switched off.
absolutely. It's always
Yeah,
going.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 So we always at it. We always at it. So for those of you out there who feel that teaching, we're not moaning about it, but we're just letting you know who feel that teaching is an easy job. Anybody could teach. Well, I'm saying to you, good luck. Go ahead and do it. We've been in it a long time. We know what it's like. The
Yeah.
challenge, it's fun in the sense that you are making a difference
Yeah.
and you're making an impact. And it is so true when you actually go down to the supermarket. When I see a student, my children might say, is it one of your students? And as usual, I could never remember where I taught them, what I taught them, the names, forget all of that. I
Everybody,
would not remember, even though they remind me of the names, I still don't remember the names.
I know. Yeah.
you know, when they actually remind me of the subject, I might say, yes, 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 I remember the subject taught, but the name sometimes, and they say, oh, I still remember you, etc. I had a student that said that her password was my surname was her password. I'm thinking, oh, and then she's saying to me, how much I made an impact in her life. Okay, you know, it's it's amazing. It really is amazing. Amid the challenges of teaching and the hard work of teaching, you come away some days, although one aspect of you feel tired and you think, did I really make an impact? And then you're gonna have a student that say, thank you, miss. You
Yeah.
don't understand what you've done for me.
Yeah.
really, it makes a whole lot of difference.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does. Right, can I have three tips from you regarding in terms of for any educator that would be teaching students who've got learning challenges, what three tips would you give them through your experiences of the online platform or just in general?
Well, yeah. Oh, you kind of put me on the spot there. Three tips, man. One I would say is just listen to them. Just listen. You know, see their humanity first. Just listen. Listen to them. Two would be responsive, like actually follow through to be responsive to what you're hearing them say.
Mhm.
Um, and I would just say be reflective, you know. So listen, be responsive, and be reflective because that helps maintain the sanity of the teacher, right?
Mhm.
And not feel like you got to walk in there with a cape, you know, because you teach a saver student today, because we have to we're human too. So those are
Mhm.
tips that I would leave
Mhm.
with with the teachers, especially as we move forward with God only knows, what this new era of education is going to look like for us. So that's what I would do. Yeah.
Mhm.
Those are the tips that I would leave you with.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the reflective one I feel is extremely important. So important because as educators, when we're in training, we reflect on all our lessons because we have to do it because of we going in training. However, I do feel that when you actually leave the training area and you're actually teaching now properly, because when you're actually teaching in the first 2 years, you still teach. It's a teaching lesson. You're trying to make the mistake and deal with it, right? Because at those times you haven't gained the experience because
Right.
when you're in 2 years teaching, you're just still learning. You just have license to make mistakes and feel okay about it. It's like driving. When you
Mm.
pass your driving test, when you actually start driving the first year, you're just practicing. You just have a license to practice well.
Right.
You see. So that's the same thing with teaching. And I do feel that sometimes we forget the importance of reflection because that's something I constantly remind my educators. Reflect, reflect, reflect. Because only then could you become an excellent teacher through your reflection. Because you might feel that you've done a fantastic lesson. I've seen teachers, I've looked at the lesson plan, oh, it's fantastic. When they actually go into the classroom to implement it, the lesson plan go one way and the teacher goes the next way because they're not connecting together. Because on that day, the thought you had in your head, how you feel the student's going to be
Yeah.
receptive to what you say, they came in with a set of baggages which you have to start unpacking before you start teaching them.
Mm.
So that's something educators need to be aware of, constantly aware of, and always practice that reflection, reflection, reflection. And don't feel that when you have to abandon your lesson plan, it's a reflection on you. Hell no, it's not.
Yeah.
It just means that your lesson plan at that time is not conducive to where the students are because you need to remember that you are dealing with human beings who've got emotions,
Yeah.
who've got feelings, and all of those come into play in the classroom
Hmm.
because it may not demonstrate itself in your previous lesson, but in today's lesson, damn it, there's something happened that it's been demonstrated. So therefore, your lesson plan doesn't connect. So your beautiful lesson plan have to take a backseat today. And you
Yeah.
need to abandon that and then just come and meet the student where they're at. That is something so important. I feel as educators, we need to meet our students where they're at.
Mhm. Yeah.
It is crucial.
It is.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much for coming and share your experience. And I would like to thank my audience for listening and participating and every time coming onto the platform, etc. As I kept saying, as educators, there are far more to educators than you actually hear in the press or you hear the politician hammering us, because we're real people with
Yeah.
real emotions, with real experiences. And it is so important that you begin to hear our real experiences, because we are always in the forefront of the students. The politicians don't know because they're not in the classroom as we are. So we know what works. We know what don't work. And I'm afraid sometimes we know the students more than the parents know the students, because we with them all the time. It's only now that these parents are beginning to know their children, because come COVID, they had no choice than to embrace their little diamonds. And when they keep on saying, oh, my child is not like that, I'm sure a lot of them are actually swallowing big pieces because they realize that, yes, indeed, your child is like that. That's what we've been trying to tell you, but you keep on pushing it down because A, you did not want to accept it. B, you did not believe it.
Mm.
Three, you thought, C, you thought that you know your child more than we do. Well, we know you know seeing different,
Yeah.
which is it's so important. So, there have been positive side of COVID, because parents are now beginning to spend the time with their little diamonds and get to know what their little diamonds are all about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody. I would like you to comment, like, and share the videos, because I am sure that you all are getting something out of those videos, because you are now beginning to realize what educators are all about, sorry, who educators are all about, and what we really do, not what you think we do, what we really do. And I think that I feel it is so important that we come to you so you know what we really do. Thank you very much, and I'll be back tomorrow with another educator. As usual, I can never remember where my educator is coming from the day before, but on the day, you would know where my educator is coming from. And I do apologize again in relationship to the challenge of the internet, the challenges of trying to connect with the audio. These are some of the real challenges that we face every day when we come in on this new normal platform. And believe me, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Thank you, everybody. See you guys tomorrow. Have a fantastic evening, night, morning, wherever you are. Stay blessed. See you tomorrow.